Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the last meeting of the year of the Planning Commission for the City of Lakewood. Ms. Devereaux, will you please call roll?
Phil Combs,
Present.
Lynn Larson is absent at this moment. Mark Hare,
Present.
Philip Lindholm,
Present.
Ellen Talbo. Present. Sharon Wallace.
Is present. She's just not able to answer right now.
Okay, thank you. And Robert Estrada.
Present.
You have quorum.
Thank you very much. Approval of minutes of last meetings and minutes. Any comments, any clarifications, any omissions? None at all? Just as a point of clarification, I don't know if you had the same questions I did. I noted that it said in one phrase, city recommended that Lakewood do this. And to me, I thought you meant the city council recommended that the city of Lakewood do something. And no, it's clarification, as Ms. Spear pointed out, when you see in the minutes or in any document, the word city by itself, that stands for staff. I did not know that, but now clarification. So it was the city staff recommended to the city council of Lakewood that they did that. So she took the abbreviated. Okay, we're good. So if we have no comments or questions regarding the minutes, I'll ask for a motion, please.
I will move to approve the minutes.
Oh, second.
It's been moved, Ms. Talbot and second, Mr. Combs. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Agenda updates, Ms. Spear.
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. And public comment period, we don't have anyone who signed up at
No.
this time, okay. And we don't have any public hearings this evening. We have no unfinished business. We're getting right down to it. Let's get on to new business. And I see Mr. Jeff Gum, is he going to be here this evening?
He's here virtually, Mr. Chair.
Ah, okay. Mr. Gum, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours, sir.
Mr. Gum, can you hear us?
He's muted, it looks like.
Yeah. No?
There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
And Mr. Gum, would you like me to run your PowerPoint or you can do it yourself? Either way.
I can share a screen and just do it mine if you'd
Yeah.
like.
Yep. That's probably best.
Okay. All right. So, good evening, everyone. Good to be here tonight. It's been a few years since I've been back at Planning Commission. It's a few, I think 2 years ago I was there presenting one of the action plans, but not since then. So tonight, what I wanted to bring to your attention is kind of the process that we're starting here at the city for our CDBG and home funding. So every 5 years, we're required to put together a new plan as a city that looks how we're going to assess and make improvements to the city's community development, infrastructure, housing, and services activities as they relate to low-income neighborhoods, low-income households, and low-income persons. So the 5-year plan that we're looking to develop is the 2025 to 2029 plan. There we go. It's a plan that specifically focuses on CDBG and home funds. So each and every year, the city of Lakewood receives Community Development Block Grant and Home Investment Partnership funds. And both of those funds come through HUD. The city receives about $550,000 in CDBG funds and about $300,000 in home funds. That's about half of what it used to be, say 8 or 9 years ago. So it's gone down significantly. The process that we go through is fairly fairly extensive. There's a process that we go through to get a bunch of citizen input, which is where we're at this point in time. We're at the kind of the beginning of this 5-year process. So we're looking to gather citizen input from a wide array of sources, not only Lakewood citizens, but advisory boards like you all, well, planning commission like you all, advisory boards like some of the other ones I presented to, youth councils, neighborhood associations, kind of go everywhere. But the process is 3-part. So it starts with the city's 5-year consolidated plan. And the 5-year consolidated plan sets up long-term goals and objectives, how the city intends to spend the money, what those funds are going to generate in terms of benefit to low and moderate income neighborhoods or individuals. And that kind of drives the whole process. So you take your 5-year plan, and each and every year within that, the city develops what's called an annual action plan. And the annual action plan is just a kind of a drill down 1-year version of, okay, based on our 5-year goals of X, we're going to spend a certain amount of money on goal 1 or goal 2 or goal 3, and here's our objectives, here's who we're going to serve, and move it forward. The third part of the process is just kind of wrapping all that up when you're done each and every year, and you say, okay, here's our 5-year plan, here's where we said we would be, here's where we are in year 1 or year 2, and here's where we are with our goals and objectives either being met or not being met. So eligible activities under CDBG are kind of wide and varied. So the federal government, when they put the 2 funding sources together, CDBG was the first funding source, and home came along later. So CDBG was kind of the catch-all program, and it allows a lot of flexibility for governments to spend monies on. So CDBG, there's 4 categories you can use it on: affordable housing, public infrastructure, services, and economic development. The city, I'm sure we've been an entitlement city since 2000. We've received about $15 million in CDBG funds and just in excess of $9 million in home funds. And primarily the activities that we have focused on would be infrastructure and housing, and that's pretty consistent nationwide. Nationwide average for CDBG spending is about 35% infrastructure. Affordable housing is very close there behind, usually about 27%, and then the other 2 categories. But so as they go, CDBG can be used for affordable housing. As you can see, I mean, it's kind of anything. So it tends to be homeowner rehabilitation programs, rental rehab programs. There are programs where you can acquire property, demolish certain structures, and typically you're rebuilding something else in its place to serve as a low moderate income household. Public facilities and infrastructure are just that: streets, roads, sidewalks, curbs, street lighting. It also allows the community to build a community facility. So like a community center in a low income neighborhood, those types of things can be done. Public services are another avenue that the city has with similar funding would be the human services funding. So public services are very similar to what we do with human services, anything that would serve an individual for any type of human services. So access to healthcare, access to homeless services, job training. There's all kinds of things that we can spend with CDBG. And economic development is, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You're developing either businesses or you're creating jobs for low-income individuals through either the expansion or creation of new businesses in the city of Lakewood.
Mr. Gum,
Yo,
would you prefer that we wait until the end of the presentation to ask questions, or can we ask as you go along?
no. At any point in time, if you've got a question, by all means,
Go back 1 slide, please.
I can.
Again, under affordable housing, am I correct in saying that this is where entities like Habitat for Humanity, for example, can come in and ask for funds or ask to be put into this program for their rehabilitation of homes and rentals?
It is. Habitat for Humanity mostly uses our next funding source, the Home Investment Partnership Act. But they every once in a while they use some CDBG funds for infrastructure and so forth on those home development projects.
Why one over the other?
Just the different rules and regulations on how you can use funds. CDBG is not perfect to develop affordable housing. It's got a bunch of extra strings that the Home Investment Partnership Act doesn't. So the CDBG was the first program, and they figured out developing affordable housing was too difficult with it. So they came. That's how the Home Investment Partnership Act came about, trying to loosen up some of those strings and allow developers to do different things.
Okay, all right, thank you. Go ahead, please.
Uh-huh. So the other funding source would be the home funds, and as I mentioned, that we at the city receive about $300,000 in home funds, and all of the home funds have to be used to develop affordable housing. So while CDBG gives you kind of a big range of activities and things that you can do, home is specifically to either develop, rehabilitate, acquire, or convert something into affordable housing. So no matter what you're doing on a project, if you're paying for soft costs or site development costs or demolition, ultimately when you're done, you're constructing affordable housing or you're preserving affordable housing for low-income households. For Lakewood, just kind of show you who qualifies for these programs. So CDBG and home, in order to qualify, there's two things. So you have to be a low income household. And as you can see for a Lakewood, a low income household is 92,650 for a family of four. And then there's another way that we can work in different neighborhoods. So every census tract has block groups that are broken down to income levels, and any block group that has greater than 51% low income populations is an eligible neighborhood to invest, or a block group is a neighborhood to invest in either CDBG or home dollars. Typically, it's CDBG is where you're looking at to invest at that level. So let's say you're doing the roads or streets and those types of things. That is done at a neighborhood block group level. So we look at low income neighborhoods and we build either streets or roads or sidewalks. And that's something that we've done fairly consistently and successfully for the first, I don't know, probably 15 or 20 years of our program. We did a lot of streets and roads and sidewalks around Lakewood's elementary schools, some of the middle schools, places where there weren't safe access for kids to walk. So that was one of the things that we focused on early on. There's another group of population that would be considered presumed low income. So the list kind of shows you it's as you would expect: elderly, homeless people, disabled, illiterate adults, migrant farm workers, those types of things. I don't think Lakewood has a lot of migrant farm workers right now, but some of the other populations we do. Public outreach. So right now this is where we're at. So we got started. The city of Lakewood hired a consultant, J-Quad Planning Group. They are out of Plano, Texas, and they are helping the city put together the consolidated plan, as well as our analysis of impediments to fair housing and our annual action plan. It's much too much work for one person to do. There's a fair decent amount of research. So right now we're investing our time in public outreach and trying to reach as many people as we can with our presentations, and get the public involved and tell us exactly what they think we need to do with the funds. So that's kind of where we're at. It's a process that HUD requires a minimum of 2 public hearings. I've done 5 at this point in time. So we're trying to get out there as much as we can. We've had pretty good input thus far. We look to do a lot more. We're doing an online survey this year. So we've got pretty good results from the public so far from the online survey. And this kind of shows you who we're looking to tap into and get information from as to how we should be focusing these funds. So from housing providers to developers to property owners, city council advisory boards, the city council itself, Lakewood citizens, kind of a broad array. So the timeline, I did change one thing. The second date has changed. So we started in October This does come back to city council. It was going to be on December 9th, but that's been moved back. So in January of 2025, we're going to come back to city council with all of our public outreach and present to council and bring them up to speed with where we are with the process, kind of what we've seen, what we've heard from the general public, and get council's input as to where they would like to go, because it's another important aspect is to make sure that this aligns with one, the comprehensive plan that you guys were all part of a very recently ago, and as well as the city's goals over the next biennium. So we try and align. It's granted it's a 5-year plan, so we try and align it fairly broadly. When we're developing the plan, it's important to not make it so specific that it doesn't allow us any leeway. So the timeline, as you can kind of see, we start in October. Ultimately, it comes back to council for approval on May 5th, and it goes to HUD on May 15th of 2025. And some of the historical funding, as I was mentioning, back in the day, we've done a lot of infrastructure projects. We've spent about $5 million on infrastructure. We've spent just in excess of $7 million on affordable housing. Economic development has not been a huge activity that we've done. There's very little, couple things we've tried, but it wasn't very successful. In public services, we spent about $1 million in the 24 years that we've been doing this. So affordable housing, I'm certain that you guys are aware the current projects that the city would be working on is we've partnered with Pierce County, the state of Washington, through Department of Commerce, the state direct allocation and federal funding to build a 26-unit housing development on the Los Gravelly Lakes compound. So one of the affordable housing projects is moving forward. While it shows that we've spent $7 million, it's actually in excess of that when we look at partnerships and stuff. This just shows city direct investment. So the LASA project alone is just in excess of $13 million. So the name of the game when you're doing this, it's all about partnerships. And then I've got some questions, and I'll just this is in your agenda packet. So what I will do is probably just click back out, unshare, and answer any questions that y'all may have, and kind of go through some of the questions that I was hopeful to bounce off of you all and see where we were at.
Questions from the commission?
Well,
Mr. Combs?
my questions are related to the engagement questions you have. So if there are no others, maybe I can dive into some of the questions you have. Is that okay?
Sure.
One of the areas that has struggled economically, it has received some funds through improvements, but more obligatory. They're there because they have to, not because it's benefit, infrastructure and stuff like that. So I look at those like roads or sewer systems or curbs. That is something that doesn't have a direct impact it's an indirect impact. And so how do you have a more direct impact? And Tillicum, Springbrook, Woodbrook, all come to mind as areas that, kind of struggle a little bit in the economic diversity category. And so how do you raise the bar? I know the Tillicum Community Center is back and reorganized. They are redoing leases and contracts and getting set up. And so if you haven't worked with them already, that building is in need of some improvements. And I could see that as being kind of a direct impact in the neighborhood as opposed to an indirect one, which is where almost all the funds have gone. I know there is something planned for the park there, which was supposed to be done a few years ago. It's getting done now, but they didn't have enough funds to do the things that the community was looking for. So stuff that would help increase the safety at the park there, like Harry Todd, or could happen over at the American Lake Park or other parks in the neighborhood, Sealy Park. So just some things that come to mind, those would immediately have an impact on people in that community. And, you know, as an example, that community center, I think they gave out 100 turkeys to low income families and those in need, and plan to feed 400 over Christmas. And so, yeah, that's an organization that needs help, but is giving help. So anyhow, one to consider. That's the only one that comes to mind that's more organized. But I do know the person who was hired recently to help them has a presence in Springbrook, and so he might be able to connect you up with some help there too.
All right. Yeah, that's a good topic. We've in years past, I'm trying to remember last year we supported the Tillicum Community Center. I think it was 2009 or 2010. So for a number of years, the city did provide funding for the Tillicum Community Center. We provided operational funding. Back in the day, I don't even remember when it was anymore, 2004, 2005, we provided funding to put in new doors. They had some new electric door openers. There was some roofing and siding and painting. So it has been an organization that the city has supported historically. So
I think that's great to hear. And if there's ever concern about accountability, I think it's also good to say, okay, if you do a certain metric or create something that says, you know, our help is contingent upon this, and re-up next year. So I like the operational consideration. I also think if you really can do the infusion of something into physical improvements, you know, that specifically helps the building, their infrastructure, and it does meet a low income population, some homeless, and the community at large with the library there. So just a few thoughts on, and I love that you were involved before. I'm glad you already knew about it.
Yeah, I've been here for going on 23 years, so it's been a trip. So I guess
Yeah.
go
Mr.
go ahead.
Just to piggyback on what Mr. Combs said regarding the community center, do you foresee that there probably won't be much activity toward some sort of rehabilitation until the issues revolving the library, for example, are resolved? I mean, and I know we're talking about what, 4 or 5 different tenants in that one building which has changed hands, if I recall, recently, within the past year or so. No?
It was supposed to go to Pierce County, and it didn't. It stayed with the community center. Or was it the other way around? It was with the Pierce County and it was supposed to go to the community center. But it hasn't changed hands, and I don't think that it will. It's kind of a chicken and the egg. You can't do anything until the building's brought up to snuff so that people feel like, okay, this will be here to last. And I think all parties have kind of backed off. And I think there was some, this is my interpretations, but maybe lack of organizational management and fiscal, kind of accountability there. And that whole board has changed. There's a whole different makeup there this year. And I've seen the community meetings, and the mayor's been out there, and it's got a whole new life and energy again. It's kind of back to what it was, 15, 20 years ago.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, they're also hiring a new executive director as well this year. So or start of next year, I think. I forget when it is.
Yeah, I think that hire's already made.
Yeah.
So there will be some activity, or there can be some activity. We don't need to hold off on that until the issue with the library, for example, is resolved.
No, CDBG could be used in that building. I mean, ultimately that comes down each and every year to kind of what council would want to approve and what the citizens kind of would like to see. So it's kind of a group effort. But yeah, it's not contingent necessarily upon the library being there or not being there. I mean, a community center in and of itself would qualify. And especially in a neighborhood like the Tillicum community, it's 85%, I forget the percentage, low income population. It's one of the higher concentrations of low income populations in Lakewood.
Mr. Chair.
Mr.
Mr. Gum, thank you so much. When we were looking at the different categories where you can allocate dollars, I noticed childcare under services. I've heard a lot of discussion over the last year about childcare deserts throughout the region. Are there any examples of how these dollars have been engaged throughout other communities with regard to childcare that we might be able to model after to positively address that issue?
Yeah, there's a lot of communities that have put money into childcare. Typically, what they do is they fund the organization itself. It's actually easier to fund childcare through a business subsidy. So through the economic development side, where you're providing funding to the owner of the business, and they are creating, in essence, a job for themselves to start a childcare center. So that's one way to do it. Public services under CDBG are limited to 15% of the total funds that you receive. So for the city of Lakewood, that's about somewhere in the $75,000 range that you could spend. So if you're just using the money, some cities have a direct payment that they can make to the child care center to subsidize somebody's monthly dues for their kids to go there or so forth. Some cities have done that, but that again that goes directly to the public services activity, so it kind of limits your funding. If you do the economic development side, you could ultimately develop multiple businesses, 2, 3, 4. I mean, however many in a neighborhood or throughout the city that are serving low income populations, and then you grow it that way. So that's typically the way it would be done.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Gum? Mr. Gum, we have no further questions for you, but I do have a question from Ms. Spear. Ms. Spear, what is the city council's expectation for the planning commission regarding these programs, this planning process?
As it stands right now, this is an opportunity for Mr. Gum to come to you, like the other commissions and boards he's done, to seek your thoughts as you've been sharing this evening. But then early next year, it will come back to you again for a presentation as here's the draft plan, and then it will move from you up to the council. So right now, this is more of an informal dialogue with Mr. Gum.
Yeah.
Can I have one more?
Mr. Combs, yes.
Well, oh, Jeff may be gone already.
No, I'm still here.
All right. Hey, I think I'm the only one who was here back when you came in last time, and so I appreciate all your work. And the funding is unreliable. It takes a lot of paperwork, and appreciate all you do. I think the economic development has MFTE, and I personally think it's one of the better ways to help incentivize or at least keep people motivated to consider adding the affordable housing component, and that gets us whatever 20% or 25, or I don't remember what our city is off the top of my head right now, actually, but whatever the percentage is into each project. And I know that's not where your money is going. You're taught when you say affordable housing, you're looking at specifically building and going into something like that. I guess I'm really over the last 5 or 10 years trying to look at how do we get ahead of the problem instead of band-aid it. And I know that I'm sure it's been on your mind over the years too. And if we all had the magic bullet, I think we would have all used it. But I think if we could put more into the economic development part, and what kinds of things can we do to make the areas where they're at better, where I don't even know if we can do this, but I know it's been done in other cities in the past. I don't know how they have it structured, but public-private, putting money into projects to help developers do it. I'm not as big of a fan of only affordable housing or low income. I'm never been a big fan of just because we've never seen it effectively work over a long period of time. That it creates an economic lack of economic diversity, and that creates all kinds of problems. And we've seen that historically throughout the country. 26 units isn't a big deal, but when you get into 100 or 200 units, it can change it can change circumstances significantly, not only on our emergency services and all the utilities and so on, but it can be a trouble. So I guess I really want to see affordable housing, but I want to see it also effectively done, and having it blended in or that being a factor in projects. To me, anything that helps. But the economic development one is, to me, something that helps get a little ahead of it. It doesn't put a Band-Aid on today's stuff, but it, tries to help fix the leaking boat a little bit so that we have less of a problem down the road. And fortunately, we do have some pretty good resources in our county and around us, but we are in a shortage of housing. And so, we're not going to solve it by not building. And so my push is more economic development and incentivize and more diverse income in the housing. So it's just not a singular project to me. And if there's a way of doing it where we put money in and the city can have an ownership interest in it and just hold on to it, if that's how we have to do it, and then liquidate that later so that it can be put into another project for, re-leverage it into a new asset, great, because then we're solving more housing problems. But, I'll leave it at that. I don't want to go off too far.
No, those are all good comments. So I guess just to tag on it, one comment, and then I had something I wanted to get your take on as a board, because I had a different comment presented at one of my other presentations, and I instantly thought, I'm taking this to the Planning Commission. Let's see what they think. But the affordable housing is, I don't think there's a way that anybody can build their way out of affordable housing. The problem is housing costs have gone up so much that even if you build new affordable housing, it's not really affordable. Subsidies for federal programs are going kind of by the wayside, it seems, and they have way too many rules for most developers to like to do and plug into their projects. So we do where we can, but most often it's for people who are just developing affordable housing. It's not necessarily all affordable housing. It's mixed housing, but it's primarily affordable. We tend to work with those types of organizations or nonprofits. And so, I mean, the thought would be, and it's kind of been going through most cities. It's like, okay, if we can't build it, then how else do we do it? I mean, one of the things you guys are looking at tonight, middle housing. I mean, does that solve some of the problems? Does the ADU allowing properties to build ADUs on their properties, does that solve the problem? I don't know. There's other jurisdictions. I mean, something that has been getting bigger and bigger is the tenant-based rental assistance. So there's some jurisdictions that do it monthly. There's ways that you could limit those payments. There's some jurisdictions that are doing monthly stipends. There's all kinds of different programs. There's programs where you can get somebody over the hurdle of not having the deposits and those types of things, the first, last, and down to get into a apartment, that if it's $2,000, you're looking at $8,000, $6,000 to get into one of those units now. And the thing that I wanted to bring to you all, in one of our previous meetings, somebody proposed something for manufactured housing. A zoning issue would be with manufactured housing. One of the groups that we worked with is Rock Northwest, and Rock Northwest in other jurisdictions has been pushing to have any park that's owned cooperatively, the underlying properties right now are considered personal property. So converting those to real property. The reason being, if the owners, or sorry, the trailer park people who are in the units are buying it to become owners. They have to have basically they're getting a personal loan, which through a bank it's non-conventional financing. So you're looking at a 7 to 10 year term, usually 7 years. If they're a cooperative and they own their properties and now it's zoned as real property, they can get a conventional financing loan, which is extremely better in the terms. So you're looking at 3 times the term. You're looking at probably half the interest rate. And it's something that ultimately would probably lead to those communities being able to borrow additional funds to actually fix the communities as to right now they're kind of stuck with they acquire them and they're having a hard time paying for them. So something that I had never thought of before that was proposed in a meeting, and I wanted to bring that to you all and see if you guys had any thoughts or any concerns or anything and feedback on that.
This is a point of clarification. Now, when you talk about manufactured homes, we're not talking about trailers. We're talking about prefab.
Prefab manufactured homes, yes.
Okay. All right. And not trailers.
Well, that's
Correct. So a manufactured home in a
category, right?
manufactured home park, yes.
But
It-
we're
it's
not,
a-
but we're
it
not
is a
putting
trailer.
money, I mean, we're not asking to have money put into land underneath a trailer, but you're talking about putting money into land underneath a prefab home.
Correct. The thought would be that the zoning, the way that they are set up and considering them as real property instead of, or sorry, personal property instead of real property, is ultimately leading to these parks kind of demise. The owners aren't able to buy them, they aren't able to finance them, and these parks are kind of being bought up by developers all over the place and they're being turned into something else. So Lakewood has 1,200 about, I think, no, maybe a little less than that, about 1,100 manufactured homes that are considered affordable housing. And were those to be developed into something else, because most of them are they're non-conforming uses. They're inconsistent with their current zoning. So if we lose 1,200 affordable housing units, is that an impact? Is it not an impact? It's just a thought. It's one of those things that I hadn't, a new comment. It's not ever been proposed. So I wanted to bring that to your attention.
Thoughts? Mr. Combs?
You know, I'm familiar with the personal property challenge that they're running into. Everyone, when they buy these properties, they have to make their own decisions on how they do that, how they get into that. And they have to figure that economics of that out. And if they do not have the sense on that, they probably shouldn't own those properties in the first place. I have worked with some of those investors, but there's a big disparity between the ownership of those. The type of the way they manage them is very different. There's the high standard and the low standard. And unfortunately, in the areas that I've seen, which is mostly Springbrook or Tillicum and Woodbrook, they are not managed at a high standard. They're managed at a very low standard. According to the police and the activity we see, most of them are better to not be there. The quality of housing is terrible, and it's the high degree of crime. I would look to the police department to identify what the crime is in that neighborhood and compare it to other areas that don't have it so you can identify it, because I think that is also a source of challenge when you take that type of that housing that is a lower standard and cannot be maintained or doesn't get the maintenance. It operates like a personal property. I don't believe that I do believe that it provides value in the affordable housing category for a sector of the population, only to the extent that it's managed at a high level. And it's not, unfortunately. So if it is, I wouldn't be opposed to it. The one thing I might say, as an alternative is if they're running into that, then maybe it's worth exploring the locations where it is falling apart and exploring the zoning for that to see if it could be able to accommodate multifamily, because there you get some density and, potentially could, give the property owner some more value and incentivize them to do something better with it. But the areas that I've seen it pulled off of have actually improved. The quality of the neighborhood has gotten better, specifically in Tillicum. And so perhaps I'm biased by just the exposure I've had to the, worst of it. And the community at large has continued to tell me how grateful they are to see that gone. And that's coming from all walks, all economic, stacks. The other, you had another one to start. Which one was that?
I think it was one and the same. So the concept would be a cooperatively owned park would be zoned that way, not necessarily any manufactured home park, but only a cooperatively owned park. So one in which it's owned by the units themselves.
I guess I wouldn't be opposed to exploring the idea, but I would just need something to support that it's good for the community, that it really is meeting the needs of all the population, not just one demographic.
Yep.
And it's really has some longevity, because where there's lack of ownership, you can have renters, but if you have lack of ownership of the area, then that you're at a loss. There's nothing you can do about that.
Is there a
Sure.
successful model somewhere for this? As we're sitting here talking about this and discussing it, I believe the general model looks like a developer owns the land that all of the manufactured homes actually sit on, what would commonly be referred to as a lot. And the tenant owns the personal property or the structure that sits on top of the ground. My initial thinking would be that if you take the ownership of the land away from the landowner and move it to the property owner and the structure owner, that the economy of scale goes away for the person who originally is operating the thing to begin with, and then that will go away all the way across the board. Am I missing something in that part of it?
So there's a few organizations that are out there doing this now. Rock Northwest is one of the ones that's been within the city of Lakewood, and that Rock Northwest started in New Hampshire, if I remember. They're a fairly decent sized cooperative working with manufactured home parks. So what typically happens is an organization like Rock Northwest will come in, if they want to have ownership, the park does. They would hire somebody like Rock Northwest to come in. Rock Northwest gets financing arranged for the association. So basically, they're forming a condominium association or something along those lines. The financing package is put together. Rock Northwest negotiates the sale. They then divide the property. They're literally dividing the property into postage stamps for everybody to own a piece of the real property. And so your manufactured home would own your postage stamp that it sits on and the parking next to it. So that in essence becomes a parcel, and then they would have multiple parcels within it. So it's owned collectively by the community that lives there. Rock Northwest ultimately is the financier for this, so they're putting some of their funds in as well as private funding through bank loans and so forth. So it's a little bit of a hybrid that's going on now. Lakewood has, I think, 3 of these parks that Rock Northwest is just kind of getting this started on. Jamestown and Bob's Mobile Home Park is one that was purchased a year or so ago. Woodbrook, what is it? Wagon Wheels, there we go. And Woodbrook Mobile Home Park is another one. And the third one escapes me. I don't remember which one it was. So there's a few that are coming about, and it's just interesting that, yeah, it was in the East Coast and it's come to us. And I believe the city of Tumwater has a regulation in there I don't know exactly where I saw it, but Tumwater is one of the first ones around here that allows manufactured home parks, if they're under cooperative ownership, to become real property. So I believe Tacoma is working on something like that as well.
So what did I miss? If it's already being done, we have 3 examples of. So what are you asking?
I was just trying to gauge your interest or your thoughts as to would that be something that I don't know, just to see where you all were at on that. The planning commission goes through the municipal code updates and so forth, and I was just interested to get your take on is that something? Are there any concerns? And I mean, some of the concerns that I've heard obviously are important, and that's kind of what I was wanting to see.
But if the city's already allowing this to be done,
The city of Lakewood doesn't.
pardon?
The city of Lakewood does not. The city of Lakewood allows a cooperative to put together one of these, but it still remains personal property. So that was just the question.
I
Being
see.
personal property to real property.
So, Mr. Chair, we could certainly, between now and when this would come back to you as
Yes.
a draft plan, prepare some information regarding this idea to see whether it's something you would recommend to council.
So many unanswered questions. Yes, please. Questions? Questions? Okay, Mr. Gummy, you have something else for us?
That was it. I didn't want to give you the Gordian knot to try and untie, but at this point, yeah, I just wanted to thank you all for your time. I appreciate your efforts and everything that you do for the city of Lakewood. Thank you again.
Mr. Gum, thank you very much for your presentation, and I hope we were able to not confuse you with facts, but give you something to think about as you have with us. Thank you, sir. Thank
Thank
you
you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Spear.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Our next presenters are also going to be virtual this evening. Excuse me, Michelle Ellsworth and Casey Bradfield from Burke Associates or Burke Consulting. They are going to be providing you the opportunity to give some, again, informal dialogue back to them regarding the early draft of our middle housing regulations, which are getting updated. This is related in part to what you did earlier this year with the 2024 periodic review. But this is the next step in the evolution of housing in Lakewood, making sure that the regulations are now reflecting what is needed in order to encourage the additional housing units that are required the city to plan for state law. So with that, I'll turn it over to Casey and Michelle. Please let me know if you would like me to do the slide deck or if you will be doing it yourselves.
Tiffany, if you're willing to do it for us, that would be
Sure.
wonderful.
Sure. Oops. Sorry. Why won't it let me do that? Can everyone see that all right? I know it's not full presentation mode. Is that okay?
Sure. Can you do full screen? Is that doable?
I will give it a try. It's not, for some reason. That's the noise I get. Sorry. Let me try it again. Let me try it again. 1 second. Oh, I see what happened. 1 second. There we go.
Oh, looks beautiful.
Great.
Well, thank you everyone for having us tonight. My name is Casey Bradfield with Burke Consulting. I'm also here with Michelle Ellsworth. And we're going to be talking, as Tiffany said, about the middle housing regulations and updates to the city code to help ensure compliance with state law. Ben Hahn from our team has been helping lead this work, and he's on vacation right now, so I'm helping fill in. And Michelle's been working closely with Ben and Tiffany on that work as well. The presentation we're sharing tonight is one that we shared with staff about a few weeks ago. And as Tiffany said, we're just starting to work through these issues with staff. There are some initial recommendations in the slideshow that may be modified before it comes back to you for further review. We're just introducing the topic to you. Next slide. So our presentation tonight is going to have a short background. We'll go over initial recommendations and save some time for questions. We wanted to start off with a definition of middle housing, just so we all have a shared understanding of what we're talking about tonight. So middle housing is any type of residential building that's similar in scale to single-family homes and that has two or more clustered, stacked, or attached units. Also, middle housing is generally 3 stories tall or lower in height. Next slide. There are 9 types of middle housing defined by the state. You can see pictures of them on the slide here. That includes everything from duplexes to sixplexes, as well as courtyard apartments, cottage housing, townhomes, and stack flats. So there are a number of benefits to middle housing, which you may have heard about before, but to summarize some, it can help increase housing choice in the community by having housing in different sizes and configurations that can meet the needs of community members at different stages of their life. Middle housing is generally more affordable than newly built single-family construction, so it can increase access to home ownership and can help address racial disparities in housing that could be related to affordability. Middle housing is more dense than single-family housing, and for that reason, it can help support smart growth approaches that reduce vehicle emissions to land use. It also helps the city more efficiently use its residential land to meet housing needs. So the main state law that's driving the new middle housing requirements was adopted in 2023. That's House Bill 1110, and it establishes requirements that apply to cities based on your population and your location. So Lakewood is what's considered a Tier 2 city, and the requirements for Tier 2 cities apply to you. Those requirements apply specifically to any zone in the city that is predominantly residential. And Michelle's going to talk in more detail about the law's requirements, but one of them is that you allow a minimum of 2 dwelling units per lot, and then a minimum of 4 dwelling units per lot in certain situations. Another thing to note about this law is that it requires cities to adopt an ordinance complying with the middle housing requirements within 6 months of your periodic update. So for Lakewood, that is June 30th of this year. And if you miss that deadline, the state's model ordinance for middle housing would go into effect for the city until you adopted your own ordinance, which is why we're doing this work now. Next slide. One thing to consider with this work is that changing zoning to allow more middle housing uses will impact the city's growth capacity, so you could see an increase in residential capacity. Next slide. Another thing we're keeping in mind as we do this work is all of the other new legislation that has come out that is related to middle housing. So just this year, a new bill was passed, 2321, that clarified some technical points of that House Bill 1110 that had the original middle housing requirements. There is a separate bill, House Bill 1337, that regulates accessory dwelling units. Those are defined differently under state law than middle housing. And then also there's House Bill 1220, adopted back in 2021, that really changed the way we do housing planning as part of the comprehensive plan process in Washington State. So we're keeping all those things in mind, and I will turn it over to Michelle to walk you through the particulars of the code recommendations.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Casey, and thank you, commissioners. My name is Michelle Ellsworth, and I'm with Burke Consulting. So our recommendations for the draft ordinance were informed by a few key documents. First, we reviewed the recent amendments to the development regulations, which were shared this past summer in support of the comprehensive plan periodic review. Next, we reviewed the latest model ordinance guidance that was published by the Department of Commerce. And this guidance helps address implementation of HB 1110 and 2321, and it includes model code language and details on what is required under state law and what is recommended. By analyzing these documents, we conducted a code review to identify and recommend additional changes to ensure Lakewood fulfills these state requirements. And to make our scope clear, ADUs are not considered a middle housing typology, so we did not include that in our analysis. So let's take a look at some of the guidance. So Commerce considers Lakewood a tier 2 city due to its population size. Therefore, it must allow a minimum of 6 of the 9 housing typologies, which Casey briefly reviewed. Looking at what Lakewood currently allows, next slide, please. Lakewood allows most of the housing typologies. Our recommended change is to explicitly adopt all middle housing typologies, and this includes permitting townhouses and residential zones that allow single family, and allowing courtyard apartments and stacked flats. This recommendation is still in discussion with staff as we finalize our draft ordinance, just so you're aware. And the second recommendation on this slide is to expand the description of mixed residential zoning districts to include verbiage of middle housing typologies and to permit small-scale multifamily residential in both MR1 and MR2 zones. Okay, next slide. Next, Commerce guidance shares density requirements. So regardless of size, a parcel must allow a minimum of 2 units and can allow up to 4 units if one of the units is affordable or within a quarter mile of a major transit stop. So currently the city does not have any major transit stops, but we do expect that there will be future transit centers based on future capital improvements and investment by Pierce Transit and Sound Transit.
I thought we did have.
Yeah, just to clarify, for Michelle and Casey, we have a sounder station in our city boundaries, and there's another one planned. And then there is a planned bus rapid transit route, and all of those were taken into account during our 24 periodic review. So our zoning and what action was taken regarding ADUs to date does have the 4 units per lot within the quarter mile of those 3 identified areas.
Yes, yes. And we're just highlighting that this is one of the requirements. But yes, thank you for that clarification. So part of this was looking at seeing how this applies to Lakewood. Here's that future land use map that was created for the periodic update. The thicker dashed line identifies parcels within a quarter mile of a major transit stop, which can allow up to 4 units per lot. And then that thinner dashed line identifies parcels within 1/2 mile, which updates and would not require off-street parking due to proximity to a major transit stop. And I'll discuss some parking standards later in this presentation. So taking into this account, based off of ordinance requirements, our recommendations are on the following slide. First, we recommend updating language to allow more than 1 unit on single-family zoning. Second, we recommend explicitly defining what affordable housing means when used as a density bonus. So to qualify as affordable housing, it follows the provisions that are seen on this screen. The total cost of living should not be more than 30% of household's income. And that income should not exceed specific percentages of that median household income. So for example, for renters, it is 60% or less of median household income. And for owners, it is 80% or less. That affordability would be maintained for at least 50 years. And so the language that we would recommend adding to the code follows some of the model language that's shared in the Commerce guidance. Okay, looking at dimensional standards, Commerce guidance requires that standards for middle housing cannot be more restrictive than for single family. In addition, they provide some recommendations around height and setback. So on the next slide, you'll see some guidance that's based on unit density on a lot. I want to look at the next slide.
Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. So unit density on a lot, such as floor area ratio and maximum lot coverage, which varies between 45 to 55%. Again, these are recommendations. So looking at what our recommendations would be based off of ordinance guidance, we recommend adopting these standards so that middle housing and single family have the same development standards and are therefore middle housing would not be more restrictive. We also recommend adopting maximum building lot coverage requirements per Commerce guidance. So that includes expanding the building lot coverage percentage in residential zones from 35% to 45%, with provisions that allow for increased building coverage based on unit density. We do not recommend changes to FAR. Okay, next, Commerce has guidance around design standards which apply primarily to cottage housing and courtyard apartments. So Commerce requires that cottage housing has an outdoor common space that's based on a percentage of the lot size. Calculation of that common open space can include setback, private space, critical areas, and etc. And then there's also some recommended guidance around cottage size, the community building, and off-street parking. There are similar design standards for courtyard apartments, should that be a typology allowed in Lakewood. So based off of this guidance, recommended changes focus on updating current minimum open common space so it reflects a percentage of the lot. It also includes updating development standards to align with middle housing standards and to update the square footage maximum to allow a little bit more development flexibility. Regarding courtyard apartments, these are currently not allowed, but if permitted, they would adopt similar dimensional standards as cottage housing.
Michelle?
Mhm.
Which topologies are allowed right now?
Yes, good question. So the typologies that are allowed include duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, fiveplexes, sixplexes, as well as cottage housing. And then townhouses are allowed in certain zones.
So were so courtyard and stacked and townhouses throughout is what you're recommending? Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Okay. So regarding parking, the parking requirements are currently required. There are some requirements around parking that are based on lot size and proximity to major transit stops. So to clarify what those requirements are, for parcels within 1/2 mile of a major transit stop, no off-street parking shall be required. And for lots that are less than 6,000 square feet, there's a maximum of 1 off-street parking, while lots that are greater than 6,000 feet would have a maximum of 2 off-street parking spaces. However, if a city submits a parking study to Commerce that demonstrates that this requirement would result in significant safety issues, then these provisions could not apply to parts of the city. So we understand that an initial parking analysis was conducted to analyze where off-street parking would provide limitations on parcels that could result in excess demand for on-street parking, and therefore, maybe create some of those safety issues in certain neighborhoods. So to qualify for an exemption from Commerce requirements, it would require a more in-depth parking analysis. So our recommendation for now is to comply with state law until that parking analysis has been conducted. This includes to amend parking standards for parcels within 1/2 mile of major transit, updating verbiage for consistency. So for example, instead of using frequent service, use major transit stop, and also updating standards for cottage housing from a minimum of 2 parking spaces to a maximum of 1 parking space.
And that's why, go back one more slide. No, not, I'm sorry, the one referred to changing the parking standards for cottage housing from 2 to 1, and that's why?
So that would be looking at some of the requirements. For example, with the lots that are less than 6,000 square feet, there's that maximum of 1 off-street parking space. And so it would be following that, that guidance.
One per unit for the cut.
Yeah, it's basically because of the size of the lot under state law, you're required to only require so many. And because a cottage house is going to be on a smaller lot, you're going to be allowed to require fewer parking spaces.
So we have already, we require 2 initially. They recommend 1. Ms. Elbow?
I guess I was just wondering if the builder wants to offer 2 spaces, the city can
Yes,
restrict that, right?
I
Yeah,
believe so.
This is all the city being told yes or no from the state as to what can be a minimum. And then if someone wants to go beyond that, they certainly can.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, great question. Okay, so regarding infrastructure standards, these are recommended by Commerce. They are not required. And the infrastructure standards are around transportation, lot access, and private driveways. And as I mentioned before, they are recommended, not required. Due to the impact that these standards have on other departments within the city, we do recommend additional conversations and coordination with Public Works and the Fire Department to review these recommendations around infrastructure standards. So these are just some of what is said in the Commerce guidance. If you look at the next slide, it has some language regarding private driveways, but ultimately we recommend having deeper conversations with Public Works, Fire Department.
And to jump in there, Mr. Chair, the engineering staff is currently looking at Title 12 of the Lakewood Municipal Code for these as well as other issues. So you can anticipate coming to you next year some changes to infrastructure and parking regulations.
Thank you.
Okay. And a second topic that we acknowledge is how middle housing and tree code interact. In reviewing this, our recommendation is for middle housing typologies to follow the same tree code guidance that is applied for single family housing. So thank you for consideration of these recommendations for the draft ordinance and this quick overview. Now we'd like to open it up for discussion and questions. Thank you again for your time.
Give us 1 minute to think.
Yes, absolutely. I can certainly share some more information.
Calvo?
Just going back to the middle housing typologies, the allowed typologies that are currently allowed, are they only allowed in the MR zones? Are they
That's
allowed in other zones?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So currently they are, I'm just reviewing, they are allowed in more than just the MR zones in R1, R2, R3, and R4.
Okay, and then the courtyard apartment stack flats and townhouses, the recommendation is to only allow them in MR zones, or would they also be allowed to?
Yes, so good question. So they would be also allowed in single family residential zones. There are some adjustments with, for example, cottage housing and courtyard apartments. Those would match, but yeah, it would be stack flats would be allowed in residential zones, townhouses as well. That would be expanded. Currently, they're allowed in the station district, but yeah, those would be expanded.
Okay, thank you. Because that was, I'm glad to hear that, because I would think that it would want more diversity of typologies in zones,
Mhm.
certain zones. So
Mr. Combs?
I echo that sentiment, and especially, to really solve or help solve. I don't believe middle housing is the one solution, but I do believe it could be a prong on the fork that helps. That being said, I tend to agree with your recommendations on adding units. However, I am a little sticky on public safety. So the fire safety is, that to me, I know that's part of the plan. I think that needs some clarification and as to how that works. I believe there can be exceptions with some reasonable accommodation, but the last thing we'd want to do is create a problem for safety and any of those. And then middle housing tree code, I know we glazed over that real quick. I mean, these two, they are in conflict. They don't go together. And we need to have more thought put into how those would work. I am a big advocate for housing, and I think it's good to have an accommodation. But if 10 years, 20 years down the road, we put a bunch of multifamily in these locations with single family density, we will look back and say, holy cow, our problem is exactly what it was before, because wherever we have density and commercial development now, we have the least amount of coverage. So that's one I would love to get more input on the recommendations and how to reconcile that in a positive way. I don't disagree with the idea of looking at it, but I don't know that in hindsight it'll look as smart. And so I would like to be able to have a little more clarity on that one. And then the last one, where it comes to with the parking study, I don't know. I don't want to speak for the whole commission, but parking in this city is still an issue, and in these areas that were all red is a particular issue, and we have to have some type of plan that allows for it. Not in my mind, not just those two highlighted areas, but something that right sizes the problem, because we have narrow roads all over the place where there isn't enough parking on each side, and it would become problematic and dangerous in many cases to have it. I am a big fan of more housing. Like, I can't stress that enough. I want more housing. We need it. We're short. We haven't met a goal forever. Most of the regional council has not. So that's not a reflection on Lakewood. It's this whole area is struggling to meet that. And then the last one I may add in there is the incomes on the incentives. I guess if you heard me speaking about this to Mr. Gum, I would just say I am a big fan of incentives for this, because I don't believe you're going to get a lot of people looking to do the right type of project unless there is something out there that helps persuade them or encourage it. We're not seeing a lot of money go into it right now, and that's for a reason. It's very expensive to build. I think that, putting more of low income in, when we know that we have a preponderance of evidence and all of our goals in the city of Lakewood show 80% plus income has the highest shortage of housing right now. And so to put all of our energy into the one, I would say incentivize all housing. And I think that helps solve the affordable housing just as well. I think when you focus on one, you end up creating problems for yourself down the road. And that goes for both low income and high income. But we got to look at what product we have, and we have a need all across the board, and including on the top. So I think I would look at the income incentives maybe a little differently. And I know that may be an unpopular thing, but I think if we focus on just low income, we're going to get what comes with that. We got to try and lift everyone out of their situation, offer people more housing options so that they can house up and stay here instead of having to move somewhere else in order to buy a house. So that's it for me.
Mr. Lindholm.
Yeah, I want to echo a lot of what Commissioner Combs highlighted. We know that more housing in general means more affordability in general. I also want to echo the comment on trees. We often find ourselves in binary positions between, gosh, we have to choose between building or saving trees. And we've seen some really creative conversations here locally, some of which happened around home in Tacoma about how we can approach and maintain density in the midst of building. I think we need more of that, and we need to lean into that thought process. So any guidance we can receive would be really helpful.
Mr. Herb.
I just want to say out loud what I hear throughout the community a lot, and that is that there is a rather large contingent of the community who feels like the city council and this planning commission are kind of out of touch with the desire of the residents of our community. This is a complex problem set, absolutely. And part of this that I don't really like, and I know many of you may share this, is that we're being force-fed a rather large portion of these changes. Some of them are good. Some of them, I think, are actually not so great. And I think we have an obligation to have some very thoughtful discussion at this level before we make recommendations on anything that we need to take action on to push to the city council, because earlier we just talked about how manufactured home developments are in the state that they are in. I don't want to borrow problems from the future, but as we increase density, as we take away, we are in We live in a driver-centric society here. This is not Europe. We do not walk and bike everywhere. I do think that needs to be part of our forward development, but to think that we're going to flash forward 40 years in one project is probably a bridge too far. But to totally negate that as consideration is also should be off the table. I think finding that middle ground is what we really have been charged and challenged to do. I just want to make sure that we keep that at top of mind in every discussion that we have, because it's easy to take a recommendation, and we see this every time a package is presented to us. This is a recommendation from a team of people who've been working on it for months already, and we look at it, and in a week we're reading 300, 400, 500 pages. Then the city council might read 1,000 pages and making a decision. Just want to make sure that we are injecting the desires of the people who live in our community currently, and giving that the weight that it deserves as we weigh and consider our recommendations to the next body.
Thank you, Mr. Double.
Yeah, I want to go back to Mr. Combs's comment because I like the way that you said it, and I agree. Is that I think the incentivizing needs to be for all types, for all levels of housing and for all types of housing. And I think in some ways, I guess maybe I deviate a little. I don't think that MFTE necessarily is the albeit bottom line tool to do that. But definitely it is an incentive that I do believe in. But I think alternatively, I would offer that I think part of the way to get there is through incentivizing through zoning. And so I'm looking at the zoning map slide that is in the presentation. And I mean, for a long time, I've just kind of thought that the neighborhood commercial zones are offer in a way kind of maybe they can offer a spot for looking at diversifying the permitted uses there. And I think that there is in some ways some aspects about the neighborhood commercial zones that lend themselves to stacked flats, if it's done in a certain density max at a certain story height at a certain number of stories. And so that's why, and that partially goes back to comments that I've said in the past about kind of refreshing the design standards that we have for our zones and what is it, the form-based coding standards that we have. So I guess, I mean, that's really my comment is yes, supporting that goal to get to incentivizing all types of housing, but I think it's time to maybe look at it through also a zoning lens, because I don't think that multifamily high density housing always needs to be a low level complex that's stuck behind a shopping area, a major large shopping area that just goes, undeveloped or slowly developed. And then with these unutilized parking lots, I don't think that's how people, I think people just want to see change from that style and that type of building. So that's my comment, but yeah, thank you.
I'd like to piggyback on what Mr. Hirsch said regarding we're provided with a lot of information that has already been worked hard by staff. So we have to take to an extent a leap of faith, but we got to dig ourselves a little bit further into that and not just take it all as, not just take it because it was presented by staff. We need to do our own due diligence and ask those questions and yes, get feedback from our community. And if there's something that doesn't look right or people are questioning, and we should question. We need to do that ourselves, but like you said, we're talking about 300 and some pages and such, and the council has to do more, but hey, that's why we're here. We signed up to read those 300 pages and not just the morning before or the night before. That's why we asked our staff there to give us the information at least a week in advance, so we have time to digest it, at least 10 pages a night or whatever it needs to be done. But yeah, you're right. You're right. We shouldn't be accepting, just we should be digging into ourselves. And that's our job. And I appreciate that comment. But we all have experience here. You guys are experienced in your own rights, and therefore you guys ask the questions. You ask those questions, and if you don't think that maybe he knows and tell us or ask. Share. Get on my soapbox. Okay. Mr. Combs.
I was thinking about the recommendation about the, and appreciate all the comments, by the way. Ms. Talbot mentioned the commercial neighborhood, and I like that idea. And the zoning concept in general. Anything that helps us generate interest, activity, but the desired activity, and what we're after. And you go into these zoning changes with an objective. You're trying to create a type of community, a neighborhood, safety, commerce, whatever it is. And those, piggybacking off of Commissioner Herr's comments, this isn't Europe, but how do we accommodate for that type of, development and walkability? And I wonder about, flats in if you're walking down the street and you're at a store and then all of a sudden you're at a apartment, how does that work? But maybe there's a hybrid of something that's not a full mixed use or a full commercial zoning, like it may have to be something new. So where you could still have a storefront like you would see in a lot of other big cities, New York and San Francisco, to mention a few or a couple. And of course, a lot in Europe do that, very small storefronts. So it's doesn't meet the regular mixed use standards, but it still accommodates the flats and maybe having a modified flat. Anyhow, I like the idea, and I'm not saying I don't want to get stuck on one, but I do agree that there's got to be more creative solutions than we've considered so far. And I do think zoning can also be an incentive, and MFTE is just one tool. Unfortunately, it's one of the few tools we have. So we get mentioned a lot, but what other tools can we come up with that are effective? And in other areas where density and height is needed, they offer additional floors. You can go up and incentivize through green building or a type of product. I don't think that matters here because we're not having anything that goes up 5 floors or 7 floors much or very often right now anyways, but that is something we can plan for and talk about in the future too.
I think it's really helpful to think about what incentives we can come up with. I think it's also helpful to think about what disincentives can we eliminate. It's another piece.
Yeah.
Casey, Michelle, we didn't forget about you, but we have any questions for Casey or Michelle? We thank you very much, and so you've heard our part, and we've heard your part.
They'll be back in the
Bring back
spring.
the report.
I think you will be coming back, won't you?
Mhm.
Okay, when do we expect to see them again, Ms. Spear?
I believe this will be in either the end of February or the beginning of March. This will be back in front of you.
We'll have coffee, but you have to be here. Thank you both very, very much. I hope you got a little bit of info from us on as we did from you.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for the time, commissioners.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Spear?
That is all for the agenda items for this evening, other than what's under next steps.
Okay, in our next steps, we have, what do we have? We have our next meeting will be January 15th.
That's correct. I believe, though, you have Councilmember Boki here tonight. He may have some comments.
Mr. Boki, yes, sir, please. Good to see your face.
Hey, nice to be here. Hope all of you are doing well. Thank you for all your hard work. The comp plan's all done. I know that was a lot of work for you guys, a lot of heavy lifting. You got a lot of stuff going on, and I appreciate your work on this subject you went over tonight, or both these subjects you went over tonight, because it's complicated, it's complex, and and I think some of you noted, there are a lot of competing interests here, right? And there's state law, and there's people, it's all well and good until you get a duplex built next door to your house. So there's a lot of things going on with all that. So I do appreciate you guys engaging on this and taking this work very seriously. All I've got to say is the Fallen Officer Food Drive is tomorrow. So it's nice to try to stop by there during the day and meet everybody and make a donation. And then the big parade this Saturday. And of course, it always rains on the parade, so we have a good time, but it always rains. So, but we shall be there. And then after that, I guess we've still got several more meetings as a council over the next few weeks, and just wrapping stuff up for the year. Things look all right, financially things have gotten a little bit tighter. So we'll see how that goes, and tighter because, increasing costs have kind of caught up with us, and revenues have flattened a bit. So, and we have a budget, and it's balanced. So we'll see where that goes. Again, thank you for all your work, and enjoy the holidays.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Boki.
I don't want to speak for the whole commission, but you can I'll take a half cut, and pay if that helps the budget.
He's only speaking for himself. Okay.
Yeah, the planning commission's kind of everywhere, and the bigger the entity the planning commission is. Actually, I think at the county level they do pay per meeting a little bit. But the bigger your city, and your job has become more complex. I mean, I think because the requirements that the state keeps putting up on us, right? And all the details involved in that, and the presentations the presentation you received tonight on this middle housing is very complex. It really is. People do not give you credit for that, but it is complex work. The Burke people, great people, our staff, great people, and they are living it, right? They spend time with it all the time, and the rest of us, you guys included, and the city council, that we have day jobs. We're trying to pick up all these details. This is very complex work, and with a lot of different facets on it. And a little bit like a Rubik's Cube, right? Back for those of us who are old enough to remember that damn thing. So anyway.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Boki.
And Mr. Chair, yes, the next meeting for you will be the first meeting of 2025. And given the way the schedule falls, it'll be the third week. There will not be a meeting the first week of the year. So January 15th will be your first meeting.
Thank you. I see we lost Dr. Wallace.
No, she's actually as an attendee, so she is.
Oh, there
still
she
here.
is.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so the last thing on our agenda is, as I mentioned to y'all before, in January is when the new chair and vice chair would take. I was thinking that maybe we would wanted to vote on that this evening. And then the new chair and vice chair could just start the January meeting. But Ms. Spear says that our bylaw says it happens in January. Yeah, what's a bylaw? You know, 'cause- but I'll start this way. Is any of you interested in either position of chair or vice chair?
I would be interested in vice chair.
Anyone? Or chair?
If asked, happy to perform, but I don't think I would self-nominate myself.
Okay, so Mr. Combs, you are vice chair. So I tell you what we'll do, we'll just have to vote on a vice chair. If no one is going to nominate, stop right there. We're missing two folks. Would y'all prefer that we wait until next month? We know an intention already. Intention.
I would be okay with throwing nominations out there tonight just to put them on the table.
Okay.
And then take formal action.
How does that work with you?
That's
Does that
fine
work
under
with
the
y'all?
bylaws if that's a question. You're welcome to do that.
Did she say since we're ignoring him anyway? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying you're more than welcome to talk about potential and then take action. And then there's no issue with the
The
bylaws.
bylaws, oh, I see what
Yeah.
you're saying.
She said ignore him.
That's what it says. Okay. All right, we have one individual who's interested in, Mr. Combs, are you also interested in?
I'd be willing to if nominated, but I'm also open to anyone else who's interested. I don't have a strong conviction to take this, but I am also more than happy to do what's needed when called.
Okay.
And if you'd
Okay.
like, Mr. Chair, I could reach out to the two that aren't here in the room and ask if either one of them is interested. And pass that on through email so
Okay.
everybody can think about it.
Is there any nominations?
Yeah,
I would nominate Mr. Hare for chair.
chair for chair, okay. Okay. Any other nominations? Other
But no action
nominations?
tonight. This is just throwing it out there for
Throwing it
thought,
out.
correct?
Okay, yes.
Okay, but tell me if you want to do it differently, but
This
that's
is,
what I
we're just throwing it out, just as Ms.
Okay,
Talbot
thank you.
recommended. So we won't, so we won't have any issue with bylaws. We'll wait till
Thank you.
next month. And now we know who is interested. Okay, and we do need to reach out to both Ms. Wallace,
And Mr.
Ouch.
Larson.
yes.
Mr. Chair, for the sake of saying it out loud, I would nominate Mr. Lindholm for vice chair.
Okay.
And I would just suggest to you all that if you have a differing opinion come January 25th, either as a nominee, or if there's another person you'd like to raise on that night, you're welcome to do that as well.
Okay. Okay, shall we leave it as that then so far? We'll reach out to the other two. Now, is it, I wonder if I should reach out to the other two.
You're welcome
So-
to do it, or I can reach out to them either way, sir.
Yeah. Well,
I would just ask that you would let me know because then I could tell everybody that these folks have either self-nominated or they nominated someone else in addition to what you've heard tonight.
okay. Yeah. I'll do that.
Okay.
So I'll just get with you, give me some, make sure I have the correct contact information.
Yes.
Chair, can I confirm that you're ready to pass on the baton, or are you willing to continue?
As I indicated, if called upon, will serve type thing, but if someone else is ready to take on that position, I've got more the problem with doing that. So if Mr. Her is nominated and they would like the position, and so, yeah. Okay, we have our nominations,
Yes, sir.
and we'll just go by the book next month. So it's a little bit different. All right. Anything else with the good of the order?
Not for me, Mr. Chair.
All right, then in that case, thank you very much.
Happy holidays, everyone.
All right, yes. Happy
Likewise.
holidays, yeah.